right, well, welcome to the All In podcast. I'm Tim Akin, senior pastor here at First Baptist Douglasville, and joined again back on the podcast today with our executive pastor, Pastor David White. David, welcome back.
Thank you.
Glad that you returned.
Yeah.
Glad to have David back with us. And today we're going to conclude our conversation about finances. In the coming episodes, we're going to be talking about going all in with Jesus' church and his mission when it comes to the idea of theology. But today, we're going to finish our conversation on finances. And what David and I are going to do is we're going to do the very best that we can to provide some simple, easy, and practical steps for you to follow when it comes to managing your money in such a way that you can also be a generous and faithful, consistent, and cheerful giver to the Lord through his church. And so what I want to do to get us started, I want to pick back up with something that David talked briefly about at the end of our podcast last week. And David, what you talked about was the idea of living with margin. That was the word that you used, living with margin. So can you kind of pick back up that conversation and begin talking more about what you mean by living with margin?
Yeah, so as we were talking, one of the things that was occurring to me was that a lot of people are stressed financially because they don't have margin in their budget to account for the unexpected. Okay. And as an actuary, I will tell you that you need to plan for the unexpected.
Okay. So in your mind, most people they're living paycheck to paycheck.
Right.
Okay, with very little extra at the end.
Right. So statistics have shown that roughly half the marriages will end in divorce. 80% of those that divorce, it's due to some kind of money problem coming back there, at least as a core component of it. And so
and I've always been told that the number one reason for divorce wasn't in-laws, it wasn't children, it was financial. Yeah.
So the idea really is that margin gives you the ability to de-stress. You remember the old rental car ads with O.J. Simpson racing through the airport.
Yep.
I want to time my arrival at the airport so I can walk comfortably to the gate and then get on the plane.
Right.
I don't want to waste time there, but I don't want to be hurdling people when I'm going through there. Right. And so I allow for margin when I go places, just to allow for, for that kind of stuff. We need to think about that really financially as well. And part of this is really coming from, one of the other things we spoke of last week was, this idea, it's if we truly believe that God owns everything and then we're stewards, then it's not I'll give 10% and then I live on the 90%. Basically, this idea of stewardship brings a really interesting concept where you as a steward of God's possessions decide your own salary. Yeah. Now, that would never be done in business, right? But that's basically what he's asked us to do. And you can't do that effectively if you're living on the edge. Many people, are probably 3 to 6 weeks from bankruptcy. If they didn't have income for that length of time, they couldn't make it. That's no margin.
Sure.
And that causes stress.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it'd be my experience, personally, and then in meeting and counseling many people through the years in ministry, that's a common way that many people live, is they live paycheck to paycheck. Perhaps many of you that are listening today, you live paycheck to paycheck for maybe a number of different reasons, and you find yourself having more month at the end of the money, right? And it's just always challenging. And that last week before you get paid, you're eating rice and beans and things of that nature. So we're trying to help think, okay, how does that not happen? So, all right, I would agree 100%. You should live with margin. So what would you tell our listeners and those that are watching? They agree with you. All right, David, I want to live with margin, but currently I am not. Okay, what are some simple, practical steps they can begin to take? What should they do to try to begin to get to a place of margin in their life?
Right. So there's really 3 things that you can work through. One is the expenses that you incur month to month. The second would be the income that you bring in. And the third would be, any kind of possessions that you own that can be repurposed, sold, or and somehow reorganized. And I think that if you look at that, one of the easiest things to do is to look at areas to cut spending in. And every year we'll look at something a little bit different. But it helps to look at both the big expenses like insurance payments that you have, as well as the little things. One of the things that we're doing this year is our bank has part of its new offering is the ability to tell you subscription services that you have. Whether it's streaming services or whatever you've got, they'll give you a listing of all of your subscription services. 85% of the people leave them alone and still don't use them.
Right.
So you can cut those.
Yeah.
You can cut other larger expenses. From an income standpoint, you can look at different options in today's gig economy to look at that. But a lot of it is really coming around to, in some cases, you need to unwind or back out of commitments that you made long ago. So if you're struggling with a debt burden, you've got to get out of debt. So one of the things that would help you get margin is to eliminate debt. That would give you an automatic margin in there. Another thing, if you're looking at both expenses and income, is you'll need to kind of rebudget every time you make some changes so that you know where things are. Now, early in our marriage, I did all of our budgets, in detail. It works far better for us now if I keep it in my head and then talk with Debbie about
Just
it.
tell her what
if
she
we
needs
need
to know.
Yeah. If I try to tell her what I know,
Right.
it doesn't work very well.
Yeah.
But we've got a good way to cooperate as a married couple to kind of handle that. But I've taken on the burden of knowing where we are financially.
Yeah.
And so at this point, what we're doing is figuring out ways that, that we can do better to create more margin for us.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So several follow-ups there. Okay. A couple will be comments and then maybe some follow-up questions for you. So I think one thing that you're saying that's very important to catch, it's very simple, but it's important. And maybe many of you do this. I don't know that everybody does this. One thing that you're talking about is a constant money management. So you don't set the budget one time and just look at it annually or whatever. You're constantly managing your money, perhaps on a weekly basis, right? As things come in your life, as you make more money or you get rid of debt or whatever you do, you're constantly tweaking and adjusting the budget as you need, just like you would running a church, running a school, running a business, anything like that. You do the same thing in your home. And then when it comes down to the idea of limiting your expenses, okay, one of the things that my family and I've done, and we're very basic and simple, but we recently refinanced our home and saved hundreds on monthly mortgage, right? That really created some significant margin. When we were first married, for the first about 6 or 7 years of our marriage, we had one vehicle. And now I happen to work nearby, I live nearby where we work, so I was able to walk there and things of that nature. But we had one car, right? So it limited expenses and things of that nature. We are sticklers. Every time we get a chance, we look at the cable bill and just simple ways to try to limit those expenses. And then my dad, we were growing up, my dad didn't make a whole lot of money at his main job. And so he found ways to bring in other income for our family. He was in ministry. So for him, that was preaching most weekends. That was most nights I can remember in middle and high school. He was down in our basement. And he was in our basement writing Bible study curriculums for Lifeway Christian Resources. Many of you probably used those. So that's really how he kind of paid our way through private school and things of that nature. And he found ways to find extra income for our family. So lots of things.
Right. There's all kinds of things that you can do if you just kind of, look at it from that standpoint. Another simple thing is, if you get bonuses or unexpected income, then you put that into your savings.
Okay.
As opposed to spending it.
Okay.
because again, if we're looking at trying to create margin, having an emergency savings really helps with that.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let me ask one question you already kind of brought up. I think this is a question that many people wrestle through. So let's say you have debt, all right, whether it's mortgage debt, college loans, hospital bills, credit card, whatever it is. You have some type of debt that you are having to pay on. What is your view of giving to the church, right? So tithing, giving to the church, while at the same time having debt. Do you do both simultaneously? Do you try to pay the debt off first, then you begin to give? Do you give and not pay off the debt? What is your particular view? And it may not be a common view, but what is your view? How would you counsel somebody to think through that? I'm sure we have people that are in that position. So what would be your advice?
So, so my view, it may not be very common. I don't know, but I feel like that the most important thing, in managing your finances is to being right with the Lord.
Okay.
And so I believe that if we look at the way that giving is taught in both the Old and New Testament, you can kind of get to, and you hear a lot today about, we're under grace, and so we give under grace. The problem is that the numbers show that people who give under grace are giving 1/4 to 1/5
Right.
what they should be giving.
Right.
And how can grace that has been so freely given to us be anything less than the 10% tithe under law?
Yeah.
And so the first thing that I think you need to do is to commit to the tithe. And then I think you need to be aggressive in paying off your debt. And the reason is that debt is an obligation, but it also it severely limits your options. And so, one of our commitments, and we make a number of commitments every year, but one of our commitments this year, and it has been for a number of years, is, to stay debt-free and to take on nothing, because that would reduce your options.
Yeah.
If your debt service as a part of your income is, too large, then it just hampers everything else.
Yeah.
So I would go first with your giving, with your heart right,
Yep.
Before the Lord, and then coming back. One of the things that really hit me this year, it's a verse in Scripture. I get teased frequently for not marking in my Bible, but I would say that you learn a lot by looking at what is not marked in your Bible than what is.
Yeah.
And so one of the verses that I had passed over a number of times, but I think is really important today, is a verse from Hosea 13:6. So God is speaking through the prophet Hosea, and he says, "When I fed them, they were satisfied. When they were satisfied, they became proud. Then they forgot me." And, I really don't want that to be, a legacy. God blessed them, then they got proud. Then they forgot me, and that was the message of Hosea.
Yeah. Yeah.
So.
Oh, man. One thing I really love that you said, that you're hitting at there again, always bringing this idea of money back to the heart issue. And you got to the gospel. I mean, you talked about, why would we, when God has lavished, and that word is used in the Scriptures, right? This idea of overwhelming us with His grace. He didn't just give us the bare minimum. He overwhelmed us with His grace. Well, because God has done that for us, why would we then limit our response and love back to Him with the bare minimum? We wouldn't do that. And so if our heart is in the right place, and if Jesus truly is enough for us, then instead of buying the car that's going to really make it hard to pay the bills, we might buy one a little bit more basic. If you ever wonder why I drive the cars I buy, it's because it was the nicest car I could afford and still pay my bills and live with margin. It really is that simple for me. I don't go to the shop or to the dealership with a car in mind. I go with a price in mind, and then I find the car that fits it. And so things like that, because hopefully your heart is in the right place, saying, Jesus is enough. I don't have to drive the really fancy car. Jesus is enough for me. There's all sorts of ways like that in our lives that we've got to think about.
So one of the things that comes up there that, again, is a heart issue is this idea that we've, kind of put into colloquial terms of keeping up with the Jones.
Yep.
Okay, so I think you need to make a commitment to pay no attention to the Jones because they're probably hurting.
Right.
They're probably empty inside and crying inside.
Yep.
You do not need to pay attention to the Jones.
Sure. That's right. That's right.
And so you keep your heart really guarded,
Yep.
and remember that if God blesses you, it's not for you to enjoy.
Right.
Paul teaches, that we're blessed so that we can give more.
Yeah.
And that really kind of has to be your focus there.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's right. I think we all have to be willing to make sacrifices. Sometimes people will kind of make a joke and they'll say, "Oh, so Pastor Tim, your wife stays home. She's a homemaker." Yeah. And they'll say, "Well, you must make really good money." Well, the church takes very good care of me. We don't have any complaints. But we obviously could make more money if we wanted to if Anna went to work. But we choose, and that's not for everybody. That's how we choose to live our life. And with that, there are sacrifices that you have to make. That means that we go without certain things that other families might have because we have one stream of income. And that's okay for us. And that's the decision that we have made. And so we've got to learn to be content with what God has given to us, allow that to be enough, and then we'll begin to understand this idea of generosity.
And this idea of being intentional and content with kind of where you are, that goes to any purchase that you would make. I would say that if you have an urge for an impulse purchase, sit on it for
Resist
a little bit. because they almost never satisfy the way that you think they will.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's right. Very good. Well, I'm gonna keep us moving for sake of time, and so there's a small and simple resource. This is it right here. We've tried to put it on the show notes. We have this at our church. This is a simple resource that I have used at several other churches that I have served at. It's a really good resource to help people think through helpful money management that can then lead toward generous giving, how to live with margin. And it's so simple that anybody can do it. So David and I are very different in a number of ways, okay, which is a really good thing. But David has a degree in mathematics. I can't even do long division. Don't even know how I got through school and all of that.
I wonder sometimes too.
Yeah, you I have a calculator now on my phone. That does help. David has extensive experience in business. I've been in full-time vocational ministry my entire professional career. But the beauty of this plan is that it works for anybody, and it's very simple and very basic. So if you don't have a lot of money and financial experience and knowledge, you can still follow something like this and have the margin that you need. So I'm going to walk us through it very quickly. I'm going to let David kind of kick it off, and then we'll move through this little tool. And so we start with, what is your income? What's your total income that you're bringing in? So David, help us think through total income. How do you, and again, it might be different than some, but how do you get to that final number of, okay, this is what my income is?
So this is another area that may be a little bit controversial, because I believe that the Bible teaches that we give on our increase.
Okay.
And so what you may find as income needs to be considered as, what has God increased for you? And the examples that they give are, increase in, their grain production or their vineyards or whatever. And so for me, it's kind of
it was an agricultural context in the Bible, right? So it wasn't necessarily salary or health insurance. It was animals, land,
right,
grain,
that's what
produce.
They dealt with. That's what they dealt with.
Right.
And so for me, the total income it really is everything all in.
Okay.
And so when I would start thinking about that, you recognize that, your employer may provide for certain benefits, but you need to be thinking about it, before those are provided, because that to me is what God has given you, as the increase there. And so the rule that we've kind of followed for a long time is, if it gets taxed, it gets tithed.
Okay.
So
yeah,
that's kind of but you may be in a different position that may not be your best rule.
Sure.
So look at what the increase has been, and then your developing your tithe percentage or your giving percentage on top of that.
And then a follow-up question: What is your thought? Okay, listen. If we just take what most people think of income is typically what do I get in my bank account, right? How do I get paid? And I know people get paid different ways. Some people get paid a check. Some people get bonuses. There's all sorts of ways that you get compensated for your job. But a lot of people think of it just kind of in those terms. If we're thinking about that just for a minute, in your mind, do you give off of what I get paid prior to taxes or what I get paid after taxes? What is your view?
It's before.
Okay.
I mean, because the increase was before the government got its share, not after the government got its share. So
Correct.
one of the things that we're looking at this year, just based on our own position, is, what can we do to be more effective after tax amounts that we have?
Yep.
Because we feel like that if we can save on taxes, that's extra margin that we can be giving off of as well. And so I still look at the top line, and my number might be higher than what most people would view as their own number. But to me, you start with what God has given you.
Right.
To kind of go from there.
And there's that one y'all to hear that is one, to hear different perspectives. Okay, that is a different perspective. One that's been very convicting to me. One that's been very helpful to me. It's not necessarily been something that I have practiced, but something that we are beginning to think through and talk about in our home. And what I love about it for David is that he is constantly trying to make sure that, again, it's coming back to the issue of the heart. And you may not agree with it. You may go, man, that's crazy. No way I'm going to do that. Okay, we're not saying you have to, but I wanted you to hear that, to understand a perspective of how we should view what God has blessed us and given to us. If we're constantly thinking about, hey, what's the lowest number that I have to begin to take the 10% from? That's a problem. That's a hard issue that you need to begin to think through in order to make sure that you are coming at it with the right perspective.
Right, and this was an example from early in our marriage. We hadn't been married very long, and Debbie made a comment, "Oh, it is so good that we're tithing." And what she was looking at was what was going in the bank and what we were giving to church. But being the mathematician, I said, "Well, technically that's not 10%." And she said, "Oh," and I could just see the disappointment in her face.
Yeah.
Because in our early years, I didn't want to disappoint, but I could see that if she said, "Are we giving 10%?" and I think it's 10% of the gross, then we're not there yet.
Right.
And so we got there very quick, but it was a convicting part for me as well.
Yeah. Awesome. All right, move to the next one. So you put your income in, whatever that is, however you count that, and then the next piece. So first thing you think about, okay, is this is the amount of money that we are going to give to the things of the Lord, to gospel needed things is the first thing you would begin to think about. So obviously it's much easier when you first get married and you're starting off with a new budget. It's a little bit more difficult when you got to go back and tweak it, right? But this is the first thing that you begin to think about is, okay, what's our giving plan? What are we going to give to, and how much are we going to give? So David, I'll just jump to a question for sake of time. If someone is not giving anything, not giving to their church, they're not giving to other gospel-centered needs, how do they begin to give, or what's a good place to start? What's a good goal to have in mind to at least begin? You may go, well, start right at 10%, and they may go, bro, you're going to break the bank. Okay, so how do they? What are some good thoughts?
Well, let me turn that question back around a little bit and give you an example.
All right.
Let's suppose that there was somebody who was robbing the bank every month. So robbed the bank 12 times last year.
Okay.
But he wants to do better, and he's only going to rob 6 times this year. Would that be good enough?
No, I don't think I have to answer that.
No, it wouldn't. And so think about what God has given us.
Mm-hmm.
It may be difficult, it may be virtually impossible, but I believe that God will bless you when you follow in the principles that He gives. And so my answer would be find a way to work it so that it's 10%. Yeah. Because
real fast, if you get offended and said, they told me on the podcast that I'm robbing God. David told you that? It wasn't coming from me,
and it came from Malachi.
but I agree with him. But but he said,
Yeah.
yeah.
This was not original with me.
Right. Yeah. Blame the Bible.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that the moment that you start trying to negotiate, it almost kind of feels like, who are we to negotiate with God? That it would be less than what He wants. And so my view is that that we should be looking for ways to increase. So if you've already been giving, then the first thing I would look for here is, can we do better than last year?
Sure.
And maybe we can, maybe we can't.
Yeah.
But that would be a good question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, kind of going back to this idea of constantly evaluating, constantly looking at it, constantly asking those questions. So we would say, look, you have your income. First item, how much am I going to give? Second item would be, how much am I going to save? And again, for sake of time, we'll kind of move past this one. Typically, the rule is at least beginning 10%, 10%, right? So 10% minimum I give away, 10% minimum I save. Save that for a rainy day, save that for college funds, whatever. There's all sorts of things we can talk about with savings, but you save that. And then the last item is, okay, so then what is left? What am I going to live on? And I think David and I both would agree, you really shouldn't live on any more than 80%, and you may live on less. If you decide to give away more than 10% or you save more than 10% or whatever, obviously that's going to take that number down even lower. But we would say that you want to begin to get to a point where you're living on 80% or less of your income. And this begins to allow you to live with margin, allows you to manage your money well, so that, again, as you're checking your heart, you can then be a generous giver and also be wise financially, saving money for the things that you need to save it for in the future in your life. And so there's all sorts of other things we could say with that, but essentially trying to begin to think through, how do I get to that place of margin? And again, the motivation behind it is God was so rich with His love for me. God was so overwhelming. My only response is to give overwhelmingly back to Him. Because of what He's done for me, I have no other response than to give back to the Lord. And so I pray that this has been helpful stuff for you guys as we've been talking through this. All right, so we're going to end with our 2-minute drill. All right, David's been our co-guest on the show last couple of weeks, and so we're going to end with getting to know him a little bit better. So David, here I go. I'm going to ask you some questions. Rapid fire, best you can. Answer them. So what's your wife's name?
Deborah.
All right. And how long y'all been married?
36 years.
Do you remember the day?
November 17th, 1984.
All right. Very, very good. How many children do y'all have?
We have 2.
Ages?
30 and 27.
And married?
Both are married, Ben and Andrew.
Any grandkids?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. If you and Debbie could travel anywhere in the world, where would you go?
So we would like to go out west. We've never been. Okay. The Rocky Mountains, Grand Canyon, Canadian Rockies, something like that would be
Now,
good.
would you drive it? Would you fly it?
We would drive it. We would drive it.
Yeah. All right. Very good. What is your favorite movie?
So I like the action series of movies. I like one of your favorites, Princess Tide.
Princess Bride.
Princess Bride, excuse me. I like the other action movies, Hunt for Red October, the Bond movies, Bourne movies, Mission Impossible, those. Okay. Those are my favorites.
All right, yeah, those are all good. All right, tell us at least one actuary joke.
So Debbie had asked me to stop telling actuary jokes a long time ago. But one that I can tell is, the difference between an introverted actuary and an extroverted actuary. Do you know the difference?
I have no idea, but I'm ready to hear.
Well, the extroverted actuary looks at your shoes when he talks.
And instead of their own. Okay, all right, very good. I like that. What's your favorite Bible verse?
John 3:16.
Okay. You have a favorite book of the Bible?
I like John. I also like Romans.
Favorite Bible character?
David.
Okay. Yeah, I like David too. All right. Last question. This is a serious question, and one that I'm sure you've probably thought about, one that I think about from time to time. What do you want your legacy to be? Whenever that day comes, we hope it comes many years from now, but when you go to see Jesus and people are celebrating your life, remembering your life, what do you want them to remember about you?
I think for me, the main thing is, kind of in thinking, one of the points that Randy Alcorn made in his book was really, the reception we have in heaven for people that have been blessed through things we've done here on earth. So my legacy would be remembrance of things done and hope for things to be seen.
Yeah. All right. Very, very good. Well, you and your wife, Debbie, are such a blessing to our church, blessing to me and to my family. And it's been a joy to have you on the podcast. So thankful for what you do for our church. We do pray that all the things that we've discussed the last few weeks have been helpful, encouraging, convicting, and just helping us all to think through how to go all in with Jesus when it comes to our finances. And so look forward to the next several episodes of the podcast as we begin to talk about what it looks like to go all in with Jesus when it comes to theology. So hope to see you guys next week. Y'all have a wonderful week.